for a moment that when we got to October, December, you were going to emphasize strength. And I'm wondering whether or not there's any incentive for training for strength October, December, so that when one arrives at the hypertrophy training January through March, we're that much stronger. The idea being then there's more muscle to hold on to as one then tries to lose fat from April through June. And then July through September is the speed work, or is July through September the speed/power phase of the program?
The July through September would be more like your higher heart rate, learning to get all the way up, maximum exertion, and then recovering.
And October to December is long form endurance.
Moderate to long form, right? So it's closer to that aerobic capacity stuff. It is closer to longer duration and moving through that spectrum. You are astute in pointing out that I didn't have pure strength really in there. You certainly could fold it in, but quite literally, if you spent 3 months bulking up in January to March, that's going to bring some strength along the way. So you should be fine there. But you absolutely could alter any of these variables if you wanted to emphasize something more than other ones. So say you actually felt like you ran through the fitness testing and you identified, actually, your endurance is pretty good, but you're struggling maybe with a little bit of strength and maybe a little bit of lower muscle mass. You could substitute quarter 3 or quarter 4 and say one of those quarters will be strength, and then I'll do all of my conditioning in another quarter. And what you've really done is the programming is still fairly simple. You've just altered the priorities a little bit, and therefore you've altered the adaptation across the year. And why this is really important. This template is meant to be something you can just run back year after year after year, and you make a subtle change like that. And now over the course of 5, 10, 20 years, you're going to be in a fantastic spot at the end. So you can make easy adjustments along the way as priorities pop up, as goals pop up, but you're going to be in a position where there's nothing that's going to be lagging behind. You'll be in a good spot. Most of your bases are covered to be pretty lean, have a good amount of muscle, and to be in great shape.
2 other questions. One, just a quick question for sake of generating proprioceptive feedback during the endurance phase. Is trail running a good option?
Absolutely.
Great. Thinking back to days running cross country. It's October to December, you're trail running.
Totally.
Training for endurance. Okay.
The ground is not super solid, which is even better in this case, right? So you're making more choices and trying to not fall on your face.
Absolutely. And then you mentioned bulking up, and I just wanted to highlight that there are some folks, myself included, while I'd like to add a little bit of muscle here or there, I'm not interested in overeating to the point where I lay down a lot of body fat stores along with that. And I think a lot of people out there are not necessarily interested in quote unquote bulking up. I also, my understanding of the literature, and tell me if I'm wrong, is that while there does need to be some sort of caloric surplus above what is required to maintain body weight in order to build muscle, that many people who try and quote unquote bulk up basically just end up expanding the size of their cheeks and face along with their limbs and torso. Yeah. I'm not trying to poke fun at them, but the idea of deliberately overeating to the point where a lot of body fat stores come along, I would imagine that would just make the April through June phase that much harder.
Correct.
And I'm not sure it's ever been studied directly, but I can't imagine it's all that healthy to bring along a lot of adipose tissue in one's pursuit of hypertrophy.
You're absolutely correct. We have not gotten into the nutritional details there, but yeah, thank you. Good clarification point. A couple of things. You're not going to be doing this very long. It's 12 weeks, right? We're not going to be 6 or 8
You haven't
months.
seen me eat.
Number 2, just since we're here to clarify, the literature is ongoing in this area, and there's actually a handful of studies that I know are coming soon. But in general, when I say hypercaloric here, I'm referring to an increasing caloric intake above baseline by something like 10 to 15%. So if you normally eat 2,500 calories throughout the day, you might add another 250 to 400. I'm not doubling calories. I don't want you to be stuffing your face, hating food, feeling awful all day, and then putting on half of your weight as fat and half of your weight as muscle. It is just technically hypercaloric because you're eating more, which is an absolute requirement for most people to add muscle. right? Some folks who have a high percentage of body fat and a low level of fitness training can actually get away with just being either isocaloric technically or even a little bit lower and still adding some muscle while losing some fat. But for most folks, that's going to be challenging. So you're going to want to be in a hypercaloric state. Another reason I put it in here is because, remember, people tend to make these extra calorie choices during this part of the year anyways. And so you're sort of playing into life is why I chose that, right? It's like, hey, you can't restrict calories all the time. It's really, really hard. So maybe if we can put it calorie restriction during the phases of the year, that's a little bit easier, and give you the freedom to have a little bit more calories during the phase of the year when you're probably going to want to do that anyways. Just make sure you're doing a style of training that supports that. So you're going to be trying to add muscle when you know you're going to be adding more calories. We're going to be trying to really push the pace on our conditioning when we know we're going to be eating more calories anyways. And so that is actually, in fact, exactly why I chose those goals for those times of the year. Is because we're now playing into life a little bit more. But we, again, certainly do not want to be eating to an excess where it's causing some of the problems you mentioned. We just need to be eating a little bit more. The last point here is the next phase, April to June, we know we're going hypocaloric. So it's always kind of nice to go, yep, we're going to go in a little bit of a calorie deficit here, but it's really just these few months. And it's okay because I spent the last 6 months where I wasn't restricting that much, and then one actually where I got to eat a little bit more. And now, cool, not hard for me to convince somebody to go, we're going to bring the calories down right now, or in a month and 2 months, and it's just going to be this 12 or 16 week phase or whatever you end up being in there. So those were some of the rationale that I was thinking of when I decided to do that. But thank you. That's a very important point in terms of the hypocaloric. It's not the dirty bulk. It's not the excess that a lot of folks will do.
And just a final point for folks in the Southern Hemisphere, Australians and South Americans, we actually have a large listenership in the Southern Hemisphere. Of course, adjust accordingly, even though the holiday months are still in November, December. There are, of course, holidays all year long. Folks. But many of the major holidays are around November, December, but it's summer down there. Just adjust accordingly. There's nothing holy about trying to achieve certain adaptations at certain times of year. It's more about trying to eliminate bottlenecks, defenders, as you mentioned, and it's really about the sequence.
So if we go back to that first quarter, we're going to try to add some mass for the reasons I just described, right? It also tends to be pretty motivating. You're going to start the year off, you're going to want to train and get all excited because of your New Year's resolution, and you're going to see results immediately. We've talked about this in some of the previous episodes. The nice part about hypertrophy training is you see your muscles growing right now, where the endurance stuff tends to have a little bit more of a delayed gratification. So I'm going to give you a win early. Okay. Now, we're also going to be sleeping more because we know, and maybe we'll get into this in a future episode, that sleep is absolutely critical to recovery and critical to growing muscle mass. So you're going to emphasize sleep more during this part of the year. Also because the sun is very low. It's harder to sleep for a lot of folks, longer when the sun is out for longer, especially if you don't have a perfect blackout curtain. Again, so you're just like trying to play with the restrictions life gives you and optimize your scenario. So the sun's probably not out very often, and especially depending on where you live, if you're anywhere like where I grew up in the Pacific Northwest, it's going to be dark and gray and gloomy most of the day, so it's not hard to convince you to go to sleep a little bit more often. So we'll do that. That's also, again, why I chose an indoor sport, that activity. You're going to not shoot yourself in the foot. Being in the gym when it's cold and crappy outside is not that hard to convince yourself to do. So you're going to be lifting your weights, say 4 times a week. And then, again, getting some outside time in the form of a walk so that you can do it in the middle of work if you have to, or catching 20 minutes here or there, whatever it needs to be. The chances of you missing that walk are little, and you'll still get some outside time. You've talked about the importance of getting sunlight in, even if it is overcast, so you can still nail all those boxes and be in a pretty good spot at the end of that quarter. Okay, so moving on to quarter 2 then, April to June. A lot of people want to look good during the summer months. You're more likely to be outside. You're more likely to have your shirt off because it's hot, because you're either on vacation or going to the beach. So let's play into that a little bit. Let's let people look a little bit better, if that's what they determine to be looking better during the months when they're more likely to have that. You're also more likely to have things like weddings over the summertime. People don't get married often in the winter. And so people want to look good for these events. So let's play into what a lot of people already want, and let's help you get leaner. Not a lot of holidays that involve eating during that phase, and so you're not going to feel like you're missing out on a ton of life outside of maybe a few smaller holidays in that phase. The days are getting longer, and so we're going to choose to get in the sun more often. We can start getting a tan better. We can start getting ready for summer. And so this is why we exchanged our indoor sport for an outdoor sport. Surfing, hiking, cycling outside, whatever the thing is you want to do. There's tons of them. Kiteboarding, like I said, skateboarding. There you go. Get out and start skating a little bit, whatever it needs to be. So we'll do that once a week or so. And then I actually threw in a fitness class here. And there's a couple of reasons. One, now it's sort of nice to take the pressure of programming off. It's also nice to, if you've been lifting by yourself, to get in there and lift with somebody else. It's also nice to now have some social interaction. The gamification, the group, the scoring stuff that happens in fitness classes is very, very powerful. It tends to be somewhat fleeting, so it won't last for a long time for some people. Others it does. And so if you pepper this thing in and you know you're gonna join this activity class, even if it's not great and the program design isn't perfect, it's fine for 10 weeks. In fact, you may really, really enjoy it. And also, again, it gives you something new to think about. Music is on. You're out of your house if you're lifting at your house. You're in a different part of the gym. The schedule's a little tighter. So you can't just go work out whenever you want. You got to sort of show up when the class is going, and you'll probably find that you just love it. You also get some social interaction, right? Which is something that's also very important that we haven't really discussed yet if you're out playing basketball by yourself or whatnot. So this is just another thing I'm trying to fold in that still allows you to check off multiple boxes of things that are healthy for you. You've had episodes on the importance of social connection and interaction. We talked about that in the quad breakdown of making sure you have relationship time and things like that. So throwing in a fitness class and just doing, honestly, something quite different is pretty fun. But then still keeping 2 days a week where you're doing a traditional strength training thing so you have some quality control there. Lastly, you can also then make sure you're hitting any specific movements or muscle groups that are very important to you. So you don't get to control that in your fitness class, but now you can at least do the gym and make sure you hit that muscle group that you have an interest in it. So now we're feeling pretty good. We're rolling into the summer. We're pretty lean. We're getting out in the sun a lot. We're bringing calories down a little bit, and we probably are feeling pretty happy. We're also not burnt out. We've done a lot of fun things, and we've checked a lot of the boxes off for long-term development. We had a combination of specificity with exercise selection, but we also folded in just a little bit of variation so we don't have to worry about overuse injury of doing the same machines, the same lift months and months and months after months and slowly wearing down something if our technique isn't perfect. Okay, so now we're going to go into our quarter three, which is the summer months, basically up here at least, July to September. We'll transition. It's been a while since we've done some conditioning. All right, so we may have lost a little cardiorespiratory fitness. We may have, not feeling great anymore. Maybe energy throughout the day, stuff is starting to leak down. So we're going to get in shape. We're going to push our heart rate high, and we're going to bring the calories back up. The summertime, 4th of July, other holidays like this where eating is involved. Maybe you're going to sporting events and things like that. Our sport choice is often going to be outdoors. But in fact, what you'll notice here is I've ramped the sport choice up to twice a week. And in fact, I would encourage you to do 2 different types of exercise. And one of the primary reasons for that is to spend more time outside. A challenge we often see with people with exercise is going, man, it's so nice outside. I can't go sit in the gym for 45 minutes. Right? I don't have that much free time. And then Huberman's over here telling me I need to get direct sunlight more. And how am I going to fit this in? Well, do your exercise outside. Enjoy it. Now, if you live down here like us, you take sunshine for granted. But a lot of people I know, it's only nice for 2.5 months of the year. Get outside. So let's push more of our fitness training to outdoor activities. These sports can be intense or not, right? It could be go out there and swim hard, get in the ocean. You're going to do open ocean swimming instead of swimming in the pool indoors, or whatever the case may be. So we're going to give ourselves more of a priority of being outside, we've looked pretty good, we're a little tan, and we're enjoying all the benefits of training outside and the lack of structure. Still, we have structure, but not so specific like the machines and the weights give us. Maybe even now we're doing some track workouts. So now we can do something like sprint the straightaways, walk the corners. And we don't have to, again, do our conditioning on the same Stairmaster or Air machine or whatever we're on. So we're going to enjoy some stuff like that. We're going to be athletic. We're going to run. We're going to move. We haven't talked about that yet, right? Everything has really been about sort of structured exercise. Well, now we're going to do some sprint work. We're going to get out and see that, which is a really important human quality that I think is important to not lose, is actually ability to sprint. So we'll do that. And then we'll still make sure we lift twice a week for the same reasons I talked about in the previous phase. So we make sure we have some quality control there. We maintain some of the muscle that we built in the quarter before. We don't lose too much strength. There is very good literature to suggest strength maintenance can be done in as little as 5 sets per week for a very long time, really up to 8+ weeks. If you do a little bit. So you're touching it enough to where you're not going to get really, really weak. But what you wouldn't want to do is go 12 or 16 weeks where you lifted no weights. And maybe you got in great shape, but you're going to feel very weak after that. So maybe that number could come down to 1 time a week if you really wanted it to. But 1 to 2 days a week where you're lifting the big exercises, the muscle groups and movements of interest, and you're good to go. Then lastly, we roll into our final quarter, which is October to December. And we're going to really get in great shape. The sun is starting to come down. We're rolling into the holidays. Weather's getting worse. We may have other outdoor activities we want to do, like in my case, you're going on a hunting trip, you have some travel, conferences, whatever the case may be. And so we're going to choose an indoor sport. And I love combat sports, so the example I gave earlier was like jiu-jitsu, or maybe you just transition your basketball to inside, or your pickleball comes inside, or whatever it happens to be. And you're still going to have that twice a week. And then maybe instead of the track workout outside, you do that same workout indoors now, back on some sort of machine or something like that. Our weights are actually now down to once a week because we're really pushing the pace on cardiovascular. We're doing it once a week to maintain it, to not lose and get too far behind. But we really want to bring up our VO2 max. We want to bring up our efficiency, our cardiac output, and everything like that. And we're still going to now walk twice a week so that we get something outside. And I talked about why, again, it's nice to have that flexibility of not having to train outside, because now you got to warm up and do all those things. You just get out and get a walk in. You still get the outdoor experience. So we run through that entire thing, and then you just start back the next year. Ideally, again, at the end of every quarter, you take a week off, whether that is a true full week off, which I'm fully in support of. I mean, friends, we're only talking about 4 off weeks a year. That's absolutely fine. Or it could even be a slight deload week if you want it to be. So we shouldn't run into too many issues of overuse. We have a lot of variety. We get a lot of movement patterns in because we're mixing in sport with machines and dumbbells. We're mixing in social interaction. We're mixing in the sun. We're mixing in enjoyment. We're mixing in fat loss, strength, hypertrophy, some cardiovascular endurance. We're mixing in calories in high. We're mixing in a little bit of calories low. And we're trying to hit as many of these nodes as possible. If you also wanted to cut each one of these a little bit short and repeat your fitness testing at the end of every quarter, you could. I would probably recommend doing it at least once a year. Perhaps doing it maybe the 3rd week of December or so. So you run that testing. That's your last week of training. Then you get to go on your vacation break. You come back at the beginning of the year. You've got new goals, new targets, and you go. If you wanted to repeat it twice a year, do the same sort of thing at the end of June, it's fine. I know I laid these out as quarters, which is generally 12 weeks with 1 back off week. But if you wanted to make it 9 weeks and a testing week and then a back off, or 10 weeks, it's fine. It's close enough. So the last little thing I want to say is, let's assume you're doing the 12 weeks and you're going to have a back off week at the end of the 12 weeks. I would actually still then recommend having at least 1 back off week halfway through. So it would look like this: 5 weeks hard, where you're progressing. You're going up, 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 up. Every week, you're either increasing volume intensity like we talked about a few minutes ago. Then week 6, deload. Go down to 70% volume and intensity. Come back, go hard for 5 more weeks. And now week 12 is your true off week where you, again, take the whole thing off. If you do that, you now have 4 weeks a year where you're totally off. You have 4 weeks a year where you're really backing down. And you just have 5-week segments all year round where you're just going to push it hard for 5 weeks. You're going to get a break. You're going to reset. You're going to transition a little bit. Now, as I started this conversation off with, there are many ways you could structure your training program throughout the year and hit those primary goals we talked about of looking fantastic, feeling amazing, and being able to do that your entire life. All I can tell you, though, is I know this model works because we've done this a lot with our clients in our Rapid Health Optimization program. And this spans everything from 25-year-old folks who are competing in the Boston Marathon to a lot of individuals who have never exercised before, who maybe have done a little bit of exercise. In fact, it's quite literally all 3 of the buckets you laid out. We've had clients in all of those areas, both men and women, young and old. And we've had a tremendous amount of success transforming their lives using a very similar model to what I just laid out.
I find that overall structure to be immensely informative. And I'll tell you why in the context of a number of examples with myself, although that's the least important of them, frankly, but examples of family members of mine and friends of mine who've undertaken consistent exercise training programs, but that haven't varied the program so much. And here again, I think of the person who really loves to swim. They have a low barrier of entry to the pool or to the ocean. They love being in the water. I am not one such person. I like being in the water, but I don't motivate to drive to the pool or to bike to the pool or to get into the ocean that often. Once I do it, I enjoy it. But for me, it's running and lifting weights, and it has been for a very long time. I have a family member, close family member, who doesn't really like quote unquote exercise, but loves dance and dancing. Going out dancing, yes, but dance classes in particular. Really enjoys it. Loves to be distracted from the fact that she's doing exercise and just really enjoys it. And it actually is a very good dancer, despite the fact that she's related to me. And on and on. There are many examples, I think, of folks that fall into the different bins that we talked about earlier, but that also tend to default towards a given structure of training one way and doing that throughout the year. I can tell you right now that I'm personally going to modify my schedule according to this 4 quarters per year. It actually works because I've mostly been on the quarter system in academics for a very long time. I was at a university that had a semester system once, but this quarter system is actually the one that we follow academically. So that's one reason why it's a natural fit for me. I confess that I typically don't vary up the proportions of endurance to resistance training. I tend to keep those about 3 and 3 across the week, 3 resistance training sessions, 3, let's call them cardio sessions, but each one designed to achieve a different adaptation. And I've now altered those even further based on your recommendations in this episode and previous episodes. But what I have not done is to really think about deload and to really stick to the structure that I set out to accomplish across the year. On the topic of deload, for me, the deload has been when I get overwhelmed with work or I've gotten sick. I don't tend to get sick that often, but every once in a while I'll get knocked back with a cold or a flu. Once every 3 or 4 years, I seem to really get hammered with a fever-inducing something or other, and then I'm bedridden for a couple days, and then I'm back at it, and I tend to come back rather slowly, and that tends to be my week off. But I'm beginning to wonder whether or not part of the reason I hit those streaks of, being overwhelmed by sickness or by stress is that I have not done a deload period. So one of the things that I'm going to immediately implement is a periodic deload according to the program that you described. And I'm also going to start matching my specific goals for each quarter with time of year. I don't think I've done that, and it's not because I live in California. And by the way, folks, there are temperature variations and amount of light across the day variations in California as well, although they are not as dramatic as they would be near the North Pole, for instance. Right. But of course, some of the listeners are at the equator, so they have the opposite issue. in any event, I'm definitely going to do that. I'm going to start incorporating regular deload periods, and I am going to be very dedicated, very disciplined about sticking to a program for 3 months devoted mainly to hypertrophy, then a 3-month program devoted to fat loss, then a program devoted to aerobic output, and then one devoted to endurance. Although I must say it's very tempting for me to do a very specific strength dedicated portion.
Sure.
Because I don't tend to be particularly strong. I'm not weak, but I'm not particularly strong. So I might consult with you as to how I could vary endurance and strength. In any event, I love the idea of a macro structure, and I love the idea of deloads in anticipation of being able to go further in the long run in terms of results. I'm hoping this next year, because we're just on the cusp of a new year, will be the first year in which I don't find myself getting some bug or virus or whatever it happens to be from time to time, and having to back off on training for that reason. And that prompts a question. And it's something that I want to get into in more detail with you when you describe recovery, an upcoming episode. But a couple of quick questions, maybe there's some short or shortish answers you could provide. If I'm not feeling well, like I really had a poor night's sleep, maybe just 2 to 4 hours of sleep for whatever reason, train or don't train? That's the first question. Second question is, if I'm starting to feel a little bit of a throat tickle, and I'm in that phase of denial, like I don't get sick, I'm not getting sick, and would I be better off bundling up some hot liquids, getting into bed, sleeping a little bit more, et cetera, and protecting myself against that, or would I be better off training? And then the third question is, if I've already succumbed to a bug, but it's not a severe bug, I don't have elevated body temperature, so no fever, I'm not hacking up, not productive cough or anything like that, but I'm feeling just kind of not well, head coldish, sort of thing comes to mind, and it's not seasonal allergies, train or don't train, leaving aside the point of whether or not, I'm in a position to, get anyone else sick, because obviously that's a bad idea. Okay. Right. So lack of sleep, I would say 30 to 40% of one's typical sleep the previous night, train or no train. Starting to feel like one might be getting ill. And then the third category is coming back from being sick. Okay. Thanks. And sorry for the extended question, but I want to make sure there was enough detail there, because I think these are 3 common scenarios.
We are going to cover that in the recovery conversation that's next in detail, and I will give you very specific guidelines, and we'll have plenty of time to go into that. The quick answer is it comes back to what phase of training you're in. Now, to walk through each scenario, if it is a crummy night of sleep, and I am in a phase of training in which we are trying to cause adaptation, I have a lot of space in my schedule, and I'm really using this time to make progress, because I know coming up soon, my schedule will change and my time to train will go down. I'm still training. I might use a bunch of tricks that we have for feeling better instantaneously. We call these little hacks. These are acute hacks. These are not chronic hacks. I'm going to push the pace. If it is really close to a deload week, say it's Wednesday and I start my deload next week, or this is not one bad night of sleep. This has been 4 bad nights of sleep in the last 5 days. This has been 6 kind of crummy nights over the course of the last 9. And you're starting to see a larger pattern, then that's a different answer. So the question we're going to ask ourselves is this acute? Or is this a tendency or actually a chronic thing? If it's acute and we're close, we're going to train through it. If it's acute and this is not a phase of training where we're trying to really push, then maybe we back off a little bit. If it's the opposite, though, we need to probably make some changes and give ourselves some recovery. This may include anything from a moderate training session. Maybe I'm going to go in the sauna and sit through that and then do some breathing drills and some mobility stuff. All right, great. Maybe I'm going to, again, go to the gym and ride the bike at 50% heart rate. Something restorative like that. Gives you a little bit of energy but doesn't beat you down. That's probably where we're learning. If you're feeling sick and you think it's coming, I'm probably going to do option 2 as well, which is some sort of restorative training. So again, this tends to be moderate, could be weights, could be any of the stuff. Maybe you're going to go out for your swim, but we're not going to push past probably about 70%. We can absolutely induce immunosuppression with excessive training. And so you may want to walk out of that. The last case, which was, I think, phase number 3, you said there, which is sort of like, I got a pretty gnarly cold right now. Am I going to train? Most of the time, for most people, I'm just going to say, just shut it down. Get out of there, right? If you're not going to be able to get productivity done there, you may be better off either going and sleeping, catching up on work, doing other stuff, so that the next time you go to train, you don't feel behind, and we can give a good solid effort for it. So I know other people who will train right through it. I tend to not, to be totally frank. If I'm feeling kind of junky, I'm really not going to train. I may actually probably do some hot water immersion, so bath, jacuzzi, things like that. I actually like those better than I like sauna.
If one is ill, or you just like them better than sauna generally?
Both actually.
Oh my! The
Yeah.
first person I've ever met or come on this podcast to say you like baths and jacuzzi more than sauna.
Yeah, absolutely. I may even do some ice. Probably not a ton though, because you got to be careful there. That's a big stressor. Mm-hmm. And if you're already over the line, you may be adding a pass there. Or I may go sleep. If I'm feeling very, very, very sleepy, and sometimes depending on what kind of a bug you get, that can happen, I will just sleep. And that might be the best choice you have. If that means you kick the cold half a day earlier, then you just won in the aggregate. So those are probably, it's a little bit of insight of the algorithm that I'm running with those things.
Those are highly informative answers. Thank you. And I look forward to our discussion about recovery so that we can go into even more depth on how to recover.
The last thing I do want to say here is kind of going back to our quarter system. The examples I gave with the bulking up, losing fat, and then getting into better fitness and cardiovascular fitness at the end, those were just samples. Friends, please don't take that literally. If you want to emphasize strength more, put in some more strength. If you want to emphasize a different one of our 9 adaptations, great, do that too. If you're somebody who has a lot of body fat to lose, then maybe put that for 2 consecutive sessions or every other. You can modify them. We've talked about 9 very specific training adaptations as well as then fat loss. I only gave you 4, which is just meant to be a sample that you can roll in or out, but use those priorities to adjust that system according to what is important for you now, 5 years, and then 45 years down the line for whatever that may be. So you are absolutely free to modify the order. You're absolutely free to modify the primary outcome, and then adjust the specifics within each quarter based upon what is needed to do to optimize that outcome. I think maybe one more tool we can offer people is maybe giving the individual week a little bit more structure. So the system I laid out is sort of like month by month, and maybe we can lay out, say, a 3-day-a-week workout program and a 4-day-a-week program. That would still hit some of the same well-rounded adaptations that probably covers maybe not individualized per bucket that we've talked about, A, B, and C, but it's going to cover 75, 80% of what would need to occur in all 3 buckets, and then you can use that last 25% for your individual goal or specialization. So maybe we can jump into that next.
Great. Let's hear it.
The first one I want to give you is just a basic 3-day split. That, again, same idea. It's a well-rounded exercise program. I actually wrote this all in an article that is on XPT's website, so perhaps we can link directly to that. I will just jump you straight to the answer. You can read more about why and details in that article if you'd like. But this is day 1, day 2, day 3. You could do these days where you split them up, actually having, say, 24 hours in between, or you could do these back to back. It doesn't necessarily matter. In this particular case, say day 1, you would start off and do a little bit of speed and power, and then you may finish that with a little bit of hypertrophy. Now, if you want to gain more speed and power, you just do more of it. If you want to maybe just do a little bit to touch it, and you really want to gain some muscle, you would do more of an emphasis there. So the template can stay the same, and you would just increase the amount of either adaptation, the speed and power stuff or the hypertrophy, based on how high it is in your priority list. Those are combined together because, as we talked about earlier, they don't necessarily interfere with each other. You would do the speed and power stuff first because it wouldn't hamper the hypertrophy. If you did the hypertrophy first in that workout, it would probably compromise your speed and power. In that case, you would actually not be getting your adaptation. So day one, you do that. And that could be a 20-minute workout total or a 2.5 hour, up to you. Then you would come back maybe the next day or 2 days later, whatever you'd like to do. In your second day of exercise, you would start off with a pure strength protocol, and you would finish that with what I'm calling just a higher heart rate. So this could be something like our anaerobic capacity stuff. It could be the aerobic capacity, something where you're getting up to close to high heart rate. It could be those 20-second bursts. It could be a 90-second burst, 5-minute mile repeats, anything you like. You could just sort of plug and play this in. You're getting to a spot now where you've had a little bit of speed, a little bit of strength, a little bit of hypertrophy, and you've touched a high heart rate. So we've checked off most of the boxes already in 2 sessions. Our last session then would be more of a steady state, long duration endurance. And so a 3-day-a-week split like that is going to be a pretty nice setup for the average person.
So this could be a Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. What's happening on the intervening days?
Totally off, if you want it to be. So I set this up as in the best I can give you, Andy, is 3 days. Okay, great. If you have more, we could certainly improve it. But this was my worst case scenario. I've got other things in my life. The most I can do for exercise is 3 days a week.
And given that it's 3 days per week, approximately how long are each of these workouts going to last?
I would do whole body exercises for almost all that. I would do your full body parts. And I think you could certainly finish that in 45 minutes of work time. A little bit of time to warm up, some down regulation at the end. You could be in and out of that gym in certainly under 60 minutes. The reality is you could probably be out of there in under 50 minutes. The total work time could be 30, 35 once you get going.
So that's 3 days. As you pointed out, probably more work per week is going to be better in terms of maximizing goals of aesthetic goals and performance enhancing goals and longevity goals, right? I mean, the numbers that I've heard that we should all try to get somewhere between 150 and probably more like 180 to 200 minutes of zone 2 cardio per week minimum. But as I recall, you consider zone 2 cardio so low intensity that just walking around qualifies as zone 1, zone 2 cardio.
Yeah, not to take us too far off track, but I think it's actually useful to differentiate what I consider to be exercise and physical activity. So physical activity is out for a walk. It is using a walking treadmill while you're at work. It is, parking farther in the parking lot and taking more steps. These are all important. And what's clear, you are not going to reach, likely, optimal health by only exercising hard and then sitting around the other 23.5 hours a day. So it's very, very important, whether you want to do that in the form of zone 1 or zone 2 and hit 30 minutes a day. Various organizations will say things like that. You need to have 30 minutes a day of moderate to low intensity exercise. I don't really care. You can combine it like that if you want. What you don't want to do is just physical activity only, which is almost always going to be like zone 1 to maybe zone 2. You also don't want to go the other end of the spectrum, which is, again, like I lift hard 3 days a week, and then what do you do the rest of the time? Nothing. That's not optimal either. And so I guess the system I walked you through here, or the example rather I walked you through, is you would need to maybe supplant that with being physically active. If you work, say you're a nurse, and you're on your feet, you're moving up and down, you're probably actually covering a decent amount of your physical activity because you might be at 15,000 steps a day. If you're sitting in front of your computer and you do this same 3-day split, you would probably need to go out of your way to make sure you're adding a bunch more steps in. So you might need to add several hours of walking to hit that 150, 180 minutes a week of physical activity. Because the program I laid out is, if you're doing really 45 minutes, 3 days a week, maybe 60 minutes, at best you've hit 180. In terms, 60 minutes times 3, 180 a week. So you might actually need to then throw in maybe some more specific walks. So you could do that in a number of ways. It could be, again, actual structured exercise. It could be simply, I'm going to do a 10-minute walk 3 times a day. It could be the exercise snacks that we talked about in a previous episode. So there's lots of ways to engage in more physical activity. But to me, those are different oftentimes than structured exercise.
I think many people will appreciate that you put out there for us a 3-day-a-week protocol, because many people simply don't have more time to exercise. They're putting emphasis on these other bins in the quadrant. And, frankly, those other bins are very important as well. So wonderful that people can check off some critical boxes for aesthetics and performance and longevity with 3 days of work, or workouts per week, I should say. What are some other schedules that people can follow if they're willing to dedicate a bit more time toward their fitness?
Sure. If you wanted to do another sample of maybe a 4-day week, and again, to clarify, this is, I'm really happy you said that. This is a 4-day week of structured exercise. This would not account your physical activity and moving around,
which everybody should be doing.
Absolutely. Maybe this is something like day 1. You're going to do a strength training session, and you'll stay in the 5 to 10 or so repetition range. A little bit of strength, a little bit of hypertrophy. You've checked off a couple of boxes. Probably whole body, so that you get all the body parts covered or close. We're looking at generally multi-joint exercises. Could be a combination of barbells, free weights, bands, machines, anything like that would be sort of day 1. You could come back the very next day, or you could wait 24 hours. But the second day of your exercise would be maybe your long duration. And this is actually sort of similar to how you set it up. You do a little bit of the inverse, but what you're kind of saying is, I'm probably going to be a little bit sore from day 1, and I don't have any free body parts that aren't sore. So instead of trying to do another lift or something, I'm just going to put in some restorative, longer duration stuff. Same exact principles for long duration we just talked about. Could be a swim, could be any number of things, could be your sport. Could be you're out, go ride the bike and go for a jog in the sun, whatever you would like to do. If you're feeling better, maybe that's a little harder, longer. If you're feeling pretty beat up from the day before, maybe that's a little bit shorter and slower. You can modify it. Then maybe you take the next day off, or that's open. Your third day of exercise is now, instead of being in that 5 to 10 repetition range for your lift, you do something like 11 to 30 reps range. Also, this could be exchanged for something more like body weight, more muscular endurance type of stuff. So this is a great day. Maybe it's yoga. Maybe it is a gymnastics thing you're working on, or any of the many other styles of training that are not, quote unquote, lifting weights, but they're not just walking and hiking. So it could be a Pilates or equivalent, anything like this where you're going to get some muscular burn in there, but it's probably not any additional weight outside of body weight. Or if it is, it's fairly minimal, 5, 10, sort of 15 pounds. Something like that would be nice. Could also be done in a circuit. So we could hit our high heart rate, and we could hit some muscular endurance in there. Group activity class might be nice here. Even maybe something like a spin class or a dance class. All these things could be great. And then maybe you even finish that with 10 minutes of some light weights to hit the body part you say didn't get. So maybe you did the dance class, and then you finish and you do 10 minutes of upper body sets of 30 to make sure you get a nice pump there, because your legs probably got some work during the dance class, but your upper body didn't. So you balance the system out a little bit. So all body parts got a little bit of muscular endurance. Your heart rate got really high, came back down, and you sort of checked both of those boxes. Now, it's important to remember the hypertrophy episode. Doing sets of, say, 15 plus repetitions per set is as effective as doing sets of 5 to 10 or 12 for hypertrophy, gaining muscle. It's not effective, though, for strength gains. So you wouldn't want to do this only because you'd really be doing nothing to improve your muscle strength. And you want to make sure that that box is ticked at least a little bit. Then again, you could take the day off after this, or you could roll right into your 4th exercise day, which would be your last exercise session of the week. And you would do something more of like a medium intensity. So this is a little bit higher intensity than our second day. And this could be something like, shadow boxing or hitting a heavy bag. It could be a little bit of higher intensity intervals, but not all the way up. So maybe this is, you're going to do a 1 minute on, 1 minute off on the bike, but you're only going to go to like 85, 90% heart rate. And then instead of going off During that 1 minute, you drop it down to 50%. So it would actually look like 30 minutes of straight work, but you would have a little bit of rolling intensity as opposed to staying really nice and restorative. It's going to be some work there. And you would finish it with something like 5 to 6 minutes total of max heart rate stuff, which lines up perfectly with that number you actually created in our endurance episode of hitting 6 minutes total per week of maximum heart rate or close. So you could wrap that all up kind of into one session. You could do those in the inverse order. Thorough warm-up, a few minutes, whether you want to do 30-second bursts or a minute bursts or straight 5 minutes. This is a protocol I like to use a ton on the assault bike. It is simply a good warm-up, 10 minutes solid warm-up. Recover, and then I'm going to go 5 minutes and cover as much distance as I can in 5 minutes.
Brutal.
It is brutal, and it's amazing. And you get a lot done in 5 minutes. 10 minutes on the back of that is a very gradual bring back to earth there. I actually, in that case, I don't need to do down regulation breathing because I've spent 10 minutes actually coming way back down. And the last 2 minutes or so of that is very deliberate 5-second inhale through the nose, 5-second exhale through the nose while I'm barely just moving. And you end up being in a pretty good spot. So that, again, time-wise, could easily be done in 30 minutes. And you'd be rounded off there. So the nice part about this 4-day-a-week split as well as the 3-day-a-week split is it does give you a little bit of flexibility. And so what I mean is maybe Monday your plan is to do the day one lift. And then any number of things popped up in life. Just shift it back to Tuesday. Rather than saying like Monday is leg day and then all of a sudden something happens, you miss leg day. It's just you're doing these things in order and you would like to get all 4 done in a 7-day span. But if it doesn't happen, fine. The next day you get to work out, you just go right back into the next workout. And it doesn't matter what day they land on exactly. For the 3-day routine, that works very nice because the assumption there is you really only have time for 3 workouts a week. And so that's sort of implicit is there's probably some chaos happening in the schedule a little bit. And you don't really have the ability to lock in 3 days per week. If that's not the case, you can go. But we're trying to listen to the pain points that people have with exercise and see if we can give them some solutions for those.
Several things about this program are attractive to me. One of them you just mentioned, which is that by not rigidly attaching individual workouts to specific days of the week, one in theory could say, okay, I didn't get that much sleep last night. I know that a lot of people say, what is feel? But I don't feel recovered or like I'm going to get that much out of the workout tomorrow. So or today. So I'm just going to push it forward a day. Yep. The ability to slide workouts forward or back by a day, I think is incredibly valuable if for the consistency's sake. I also really like this idea of some of the long duration work coming a day after hitting the strength and a bit of hypertrophy work. So this would be the day 2. One thing that I've experienced over and over is that if I'm very sore in a given muscle group, especially my legs, doing some low intensity cardio, whether or not it's a jog or on the bike, typically for me it's a jog or even skipping rope and then walking, skipping rope and walking does seem to dissipate the soreness. I'm sure there's a mechanism. There's a mechanism for everything, frankly. Yep. But I like that arrangement. And then I also like this idea of making sure that there's a workout for muscular endurance, because I feel like unless I've been stuck without a good gym or I've decided to specifically train body weight exercise, which I did a few years ago, I got really excited about some of Pavel Satsulin's work.
Great stuff. Yeah.
He has a
amazing
book, The Naked Warrior, which doesn't involve training naked, although I suppose you could if you wanted, but it was really about no weights and involved building up to pistol squats and one-arm push-ups and things of that sort. Even doing pull-ups on doors. And I discovered that some door frames are much stronger than others in hotels. I just accidentally caused some damage there. But in any case, muscular endurance, I think, is a really interesting one that I plan to incorporate into my schedule. But that is, I think, is one that's often overlooked unless people really have an aversion to weights and to machines.
You're right. It shouldn't be because it's pretty low-hanging fruit. You don't need a lot of equipment for it typically. It doesn't hurt that bad. You don't often get that sore out of it, and you're going to feel a nice, wonderful pump afterwards. So it's great. And as we discussed many times now, it is quite effective at hypertrophy.
Yeah, I don't know if they fit specifically with muscular endurance, but if you look at the physiques, for example, on rock climbers, I mean, they have, to me, of course, they have usually the experienced climbers have pretty remarkable body compositions. They tend to be lean and lithe and flexible, all those things that many people aspire to. But the other thing is their development always looks exceedingly balanced. You don't really tend to see climbers that are like overdeveloped in the torso and underdeveloped in the arms, or overdeveloped in the arms despite all the climbing and underdeveloped in relatively in the other limb movement. That's true for women and men. It's not a sport that I participate in, but it seems like what they're doing is essentially muscular endurance training.
Basically, yep.
Yeah, so there's really something there to be valued. So that's a 4-day-a-week schedule with off days or rest days inserted as needed, and then continuing. For those that are a bit more committed to their fitness and want to do a 5 or 6 day a week program, would you recommend just collapsing some of the off days, paying more attention to recovery, and cycling through more quickly?
Yeah, absolutely. You could combine that and just run that, either one of those programs. So you could run that 3-day-a-week program back to back. Get that done in 6 days.
So day 1, speed, power, hypertrophy. Day 2, strength work with elevated heart rate, anaerobic capacity, and day 3, endurance, and then just cycle through again.
Yeah, you take day 4 off of the week, and then you go back again. So we would be having 6 days of exercise, 1 day off, and you'd be getting every one of those adaptations in multiple times a week. That is almost exactly how I would set up a 6-day-a-week program.
Great. I love the elegance and the simplicity of that and the thoroughness of it, because it checks off so many, if not all, of the 9 major adaptations to exercise that we've been talking about these episodes. And I suppose the one thing that I want to highlight and pose this also as a question is that early in our discussions in a previous episode, you mentioned that so much of what people think of and apply as it relates to resistance training is borrowed from bodybuilding and hypertrophy training specifically, which typically involves getting close to failure or failure, sometimes even involving rest pause, where you hit failure, then set the weight down for a few seconds and repeat these high intensity techniques, accentuating the negative, so-called eccentric, et cetera. In hearing about these protocols of 3-day-a-week or 4-day-a-week, 6-day-a-week, it's very clear to me that if one is not careful to omit that kind of thinking and suddenly is taking their strength work and speed work to failure, or is pushing too hard on muscular endurance to the point where you're just grinding out that very last push-up on every set, that the amount of soreness and the amount of recovery that results from these workouts might start to cause progress issues. So one thing that's in the back of my mind is, as you've described these programs, is that even though some of them are very brief or involve a minimum of time commitment, in particular the 3-day-a-week, but also the 4-day-a-week schedule, that there is a discipline involved in making sure that you stick to the workout that you're supposed to do that day and not go ham, as they say, and just throw in a couple extra sets of bicep curls and tricep pushes because you want to do that and you thought you could get away with that, but you have to come back pretty quickly and do some serious, meaning devoted speed and power work or strength work. And if you haven't been disciplined about not doing certain forms of exercise, I could see how the whole thing could kind of crash quickly, and one could think, oh, this is just too much work, or it's not for me.
Yep.
So this, I suppose, is now where the question comes, which is, what are some of the key points that people need to keep in mind when they embrace a program? How rigidly do they need to stay attached to, today's endurance day, I'm just doing endurance. Today's strength day, I'm just doing strength work. I'm not going to take things to absolute failure or beyond failure.
I am absolutely happy with anyone modifying any of the sample programs however they would like to. My only recommendation for the question you just posed would be set your program, and then if you're going to make a change, fine. But that is a change to your program. In other words, don't just make decisions every single day and make changes. If you're doing that, you might as well not have a program. And as we described earlier, there is clear evidence that having a program is better than not, regardless of the effectiveness of the program. And so my general comment to that is, okay, fine. A day or two, you made some modifications. No problem. We're in a situation now where it's like you're basically